It is also true, of course, that this reality is true not just for the province of Alberta, but the country as a whole. Federal coffers also affected by what happens to the energy sector and energy-reliant provinces. We were reminded by the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador that it is true for his province as well. And Saskatchewan, also energy dependent. Brad Wall is the former Premier of Saskatchewan, now a special advisor to Osler's. And Brad, let's just start with your concerns about the double whammy that Saskatchewan and Alberta are facing amid the pandemic and what's happening with oil prices.
Sure. Well, it has been a double whammy. There's no doubt about it. We've been sort of the bystander victim of the knife fight between the Russians and the Saudis and the breakdown of that OPEC agreement. And then, of course, the precipitous fall in demand for oil caused by COVID-19. And the net result, as you've just played in the clip from Premier Kenney, is that there's net negative returns in the offing. I think there's shut-ins in the offing from Canadian producers. And so some of us are saying now would be a time perhaps for both a short, a mid, and a long-term approach to the energy sector, remembering that it is our number one export as a country. I think sometimes we forget that. Remembering that its contribution to our GDP is roughly 5 times that of the auto sector. I think we all look back favorably on the economic aid package from the Harper government to the auto sector as the right thing to have done. And perhaps we need a little bit of that sort of approach in terms of the energy sector in our country, oil and gas specifically. The liquidity of companies, especially those that have a very good chance of surviving this, should be paramount in any economic aid package. I think there's the opportunity for liquidity loans to companies that present a great, the best prospects of being able to survive and pay it back, obviously. Perhaps bringing forward tax pools as an option. There's operating cost issues in the patch as well on power rates, perhaps temporary royalty relief, property taxes. I think things should be on the table for a multi-level of government and multifaceted approach, because the sector it's of national importance to our economy. And while we're focused on public health and safety, Amanda, I think we also have to be concerned about coming out of this. What's on the other side economically for us? Not just challenges, but opportunities as well.
So one thing I really want to get at here is, and you understand these issues so well, including the provincial-federal dynamic that is an additional layer of complexity. In many a commodity industry, the producers overproduce, right? They rush to produce when the prices are good. They have oversupply or overcapacity. You see it in the pulp and paper industry in a cyclical way, and then they have to close mills and shut down and the prices collapse. Oil has been unique, right? Because we've managed the price of this globally, and for some reason, for many decades, we thought that was fine. When we have a market set price, maybe it's $5 for Western Canada Select. Who knows? Maybe we don't have a profitable oil industry. And I guess my question to you is, what kind of government support do we want if there's a new reality around the price? The government can't send the price back up to $70.
Absolutely. But let's also remember that all of the major forecasters, including the International Energy Agency, are talking about an increase in demand for oil and gas for fossil fuels through to 2050. We're going to come out on the other side of this at some point, obviously, and everyone hopes it's sooner rather than later. But I think it's fair to assume there will still be a demand for oil and gas. And so if we as a country take the approach that as long as there is a demand for oil in the world that takes us several decades out, then Canada should have a vision of being a global leader in meeting that supply, that demand, in a way that's sustainable, in a way that's responsible, perhaps more than any other country in the world. And so, to your question, that means that should inform government policy at the provincial and federal level. And that, as I've touched on earlier in this discussion, Amanda, might mean dealing with some urgent issues like the liquidity of our companies. I like what Minister Morneau is committed to in terms of abandoned well cleanup program to put frontline energy workers back on the job. And then we need to take a long-term strategic approach as well on trade issues. And I think we need that multifaceted approach right now, Amanda.
Because we still have the capacity constraints, right? Take away all the other problems, and 2 years ago, Canada had a problem getting oil to market. That problem has not been solved. We're quite a ways from solving it, in fact. nothing about the current situation suggests we can move any faster on that. So my question to you is, would now be the time when federal money is headed this way to do the pivot, to actually try to invest in different technologies, next generation, non-fossil fuel based, in other words, and really, because it's happening anyway, whether we like it or not, use this as a moment?
Well, I think we have been using this as a moment. I think Canada has been, whether it's been intentional or not, Canada is an all of the above energy nation. We have displayed leadership in renewables. We have hydro leadership, obviously, because of the assets that are here in provinces like Manitoba and Quebec. And then, of course, we're a global leader. We have the third greatest oil reserves on the planet. I agree that now is the time to continue with an all-of-the-above approach, to understand that oil and gas may well be this source of transition energy, but the demand's going to last for decades, so let's not lose sight of that. I think what we've seen from Premier Moe, Premier Ford, and Premier Higgs in that MOU they signed on small modular reactor technology is important, especially as we look for base load sources of zero emission power in the world. Canada should be a leader, not just in terms of mining the uranium, which Saskatchewan is, and 10 to 14, 15% of the world's production of uranium in any given year comes from our province, so it comes from Canada, but also in the rest of the opportunities through the nuclear cycle. So I do think this is a chance for us to continue an all of the above approach, but in so doing, let's remember that oil and gas is roughly 10% of our GDP in any given year, 500,000 people working in it. There will be demand for it globally. So let's have a vision from Canada, from our federal government, all governments, that's worthy of that fact.
All right, and just before we let you go, I do want to ask you, you ran a province, what your current thinking is on how long the economic impact here lasts. One of the big questions, of course, and I know it's an unknown one, but is the shape of the recovery? Is it a V? Is it a U? Is it an L? What's your thinking about the length of this recession?
Well, first of all, let me just say how grateful that I am. I know so many Canadians are for all of our leaders at every level of government. I cannot even imagine what they are facing. I really can't imagine the briefings they got at the start of this, they continue to get, and how these leaders are meeting the challenge by providing leadership and reassurance to the country. I think the answer to your question is going to be sector dependent. That's my view. I think certain sectors are going to perhaps recover more quickly because there will be some pent-up economic activity as a result of the shutdown. Other sectors, unfortunately, like oil and gas, perhaps because of the complicating factor of the price fight, this war between Russia and OPEC, that complicates things perhaps for the longer term, in addition to the dampened demand. And so I think it really depends on the sector in respect of your question.
All right, it's great to have you with us. Really appreciate it. Brad Wall is a former Premier of Saskatchewan, now Special Advisor to Osler.